at Centre Court, we don't talk much about football, though, of course, Manchester is always on my mind. Hasn't been the easiest few years. You can guess which of the two teams that I support. But it's lovely to welcome Xavier Duran. Xavier is the Programs Director of the multiple MBA options at the Alliance Manchester Business School. He's been with the school for over 18 years now. From his home in Barcelona, he swapped one great footballing tradition for another. Xavier, it's lovely to have you with us at Centre Court. You've really got the chance to know Manchester in nearly 2 decades. Tell us a little bit about how that location, such a dynamic city, even beyond football, how that sort of feeds into the Alliance Manchester experience.
Hi, Matt, and it's lovely to be here as well. Yes, absolutely. It's an absolutely amazing place to be in. It's a very vibrant, very dynamic city. May that be from football, and obviously there's the Reds that you seem to be referring to. There's the Blues, also that attract a coach that we used to have in Barcelona ourselves as well. Yes. But there's a very dynamic cultural life here in Manchester that translates into a lot of music going on. There's a lot of young people. It's a very welcoming city in its most pure northern English style. Anybody that comes here is made feel incredibly welcome, and there's a lot of stuff to do. And even if you think about Manchester as perhaps being the cradle of the Industrial Revolution and what facilitated it, so that entrepreneurial spirit, that different way perhaps of looking at the world, or what would have been at the time a different way of looking at the world, I think that's really in that city. It is still today, I think, and it's very much so explanatory of what makes a university like ours what it is, a very dynamic institution, really at the forefront of research, of exploring new trends and looking at what the future can actually bring. We're very lucky that the University of Manchester is actually not located elsewhere in the city or in the suburbs or far away from where all this happens. We are right next to the very city center. We're right next to this heartbeat of the city, and it really is part of what makes the University of Manchester a great place to be, because you can really feel that energy, you can really feel that passion, that enthusiasm, that life, really that fits to the city.
Right. Of course, one of Europe's top universities, science, technology. One of your MBA alums was in this year's Queen's Honours List for his work on the Pfizer COVID vaccine. So, tremendous breadth, business and science. Tell us a little bit about how an MBA student is then able to personalize their experience. I mean, already it's a very flexible program in terms of course length, and how you then put together, I guess, electives and consulting programs to really make the program your own.
Yeah, so obviously, and I think you've already alluded to the level of customization we have in our full-time MBA. Our default structure is one where our students come to Manchester for 18 months, and in essence, they go through the program, taking the core of business and management in the first 9 months, what we tend to refer to as our diploma stage. And then afterwards, so for the remainder of the program, usually 9 other months, they will be customizing the program by virtue of taking a large number of electives, or going on internships, or taking study tours at one of our international locations, so Hong Kong or Singapore, or they can also go to Dubai, or they can go to Shanghai, or they can go to Brazil, and so on. They can do loads of personal projects, entrepreneurship projects, and so on. And then the last 3-4 months of the program, they all come back to Manchester, and again, it becomes a bit more structured as they do their capstone international business project. And when I say that it becomes a bit more structured, it's simply by virtue of all our students pretty much doing the same course again, but it's far from saying there is actually a situation where they're all doing the same, because those projects by their own nature are very different. Different students will be looking at different project briefs, and it's quite likely that many of them might end up traveling as part of those projects, or indeed dealing with different types of business issues. There is a lot of customization, all right, and obviously, in addition to that default position to pursuing an MBA over 18 months, as you mentioned, Matt, we can also accelerate their pathways to the program by doing that program within a period of 12 months or 15 months. And what that means is that students might be taking some of those electives together with their core units during the first 9 months, really.
Got it. So with that flexibility, you place tremendous emphasis on action learning. And I guess those consulting projects, whether it's social impact, starting up a business, or a big commercial multinational project, really, I guess, reinforces that core curriculum. And your colleagues from Career Services has said, just how this prepares Manchester graduates for the job market that follows.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're totally right there. I think that's possibly, again, very much so part of that behavioral teaching and learning approach that we take, not only in the MBA program, but in the wider business school. Since we were created back in 1965, we've really taken a focus on perhaps not just conveying knowledge to our students, but equipping them with the skills really to make them successful business and management practitioners. So this is actually quite important to us. We are equipping our students with an ability to become management. This is very important, and really that behavioral ethos perhaps is subsumed into what we in the MBA in itself call the Manchester method. It's this very hands-on or experiential learning approach that we actually take in the program. And yes, that takes place by virtue of consultancy projects, but indeed it also takes place by many other interventions that we have in the program. May that be through simulations, may that be through role plays, may that be through the way we actually assess our students. But yes, you're right. The projects tend to be one of the key features that many of our applicants, that many of our students tend to really be interested in. And it's actually quite interesting because what we do is perhaps take a slightly different approach than many different schools. Yeah, we've been doing these consultancy projects again since the late 1960s, and perhaps we were quite pioneering in that regard. But many business schools, many MBA programs actually have caught up over the years, and it's quite typical to see that many programs now, they will be offering a taught element, and then they will have a capstone project at the end of the MBA where they apply what they've actually learned through some form of consultancy or real client-based projects. But we do it slightly differently. We do not have a capstone project at the end of the program to try to apply what you've learned. Actually, quite the opposite. What we believe is that the learning, and particularly what makes you a business and a management practitioner, is what you actually do when you're getting your hands dirty with a real business, with a real management problem or situation. Where the learning happens is in the projects. So in much the same way as a plumber will learn a trade, or much the same way as a pilot will learn the trade, getting their hands dirty with pipes, or spending time on a flight simulator, or a medical doctor will become a professional by spending loads of hours in a hospital. I think it's the exact same with business and management practitioner. Ultimately, what we want our MBAs to become. You really learn that profession. You really learn the practice of business by getting those hands dirty with those real situations. This is where the learning occurs. And because of that, what we do is from the outset. So from the very first week that our students come into the program in September, they start with those real client-based consultancy projects. They really tackle, as part of a group, a real problem, a real situation. Then they will have other interventions, what we call our commercial business project, our international business project, but certainly we also have a mergers and acquisitions project and so on. This is where the real learning happens. And yes, of course, we still have to teach you what are the key tenets of marketing, of corporate finance, of accounting, of operations management, economics, organizational behavior, organizational design. Of course, we still need to do that, not least because we are a triple accredited school and we have to. But rather than seeing those projects as interventions where we apply what you have learned in class, we look at it the other way around. So the real learning conduit is the project. And those taught elements of the program support you in your ability to successfully perform those projects. So we actually look at it from a slightly different perspective, in my opinion.
You talked about groups that you put together as they arrive into the program in September. Now, you're incredibly international with nationalities from all over the world. You're one of the most gender balanced MBA programs. The latest intake, I think, is 46% women in the MBA program. So as you think about that emphasis on the group, plus that very personal individual journey and how people are really personalizing the Manchester MBA experience, what impact does such a diverse group, so many voices from so many different perspectives, really bring to the way that they're looking at those different business challenges?
Yeah, I'll admit it can be difficult sometimes, because not only you're actually bringing people from different cultural backgrounds, but you're also bringing very different personalities. You're also bringing people that come from every single walk of life. So the way that an engineer looks different than the way somebody that works on finance or someone that works in sales will look at the world. So in essence, what we're creating sometimes is a recipe for disaster. Those groups will actually sometimes generate lots of sparks, but this is really, really conducive to a very, very powerful learning experience. It is quite often that we'll see a case of group conflict. Some people will say that there are free riders or free loafers. You might witness quite often clashes of personalities. So obviously we tend to attract very vocal students with very different ideas as to how we should be recommending something to a specific business. Perhaps you have a situation where some students from specific cultural backgrounds perhaps don't like speaking out so much because they see being loud or being very forthcoming to be perhaps rude. But this is ultimately where the learning happens as well, in my opinion. So it is putting those groups and making sure that students can actually, as we call it, fall off the bike and learn from it, that really provides you with an opportunity to reflect not only on how others contribute to group work, but how you contribute to group work and how you can actually make a group become an effective and an efficient team. And we see it over time that groups tend to become better and better and better at it. It goes without saying that many students may actually start being very concentrated. So they tend to think, right, we need to discuss, we need to agree on absolutely everything. But very quickly they realize, you know what, if you base everything on consensus or even on rules of democracy, the only thing you're actually doing is you're slowing yourself down, and perhaps you're actually allowing too much dissent, which is perhaps not good for business, particularly when you have a deliverable in 24 hours. And slowly but surely, students actually learn that perhaps creating some form of a hierarchy, creating some form of structure that will allow them to make more effective and more efficient decisions is actually the way to go. And it goes without saying as well that over time students will actually be able to learn from this process perhaps to make themselves heard, to put forward a more compelling argument, or indeed to develop their leadership skills within that group, or hopefully within that team. So yes, working in groups can be difficult at times, can be very, very frustrating for students. It is not easy to manage, that goes without saying, but the learning opportunities that it offers are incredibly powerful. Now, of course, we can put a lot of support mechanisms. We can tell students about the conflicts that they may encounter. We, for example, spend quite a bit of time, actually, at the very beginning of the program, working with the Breathitt Trust in the Lake District, where we bring our students, for example, to build themselves with teams to reflect on contributions and the need that they actually have to make sure that they contribute to teams and so on. Those interventions are repeated over the course of the program a number of times, and then obviously from an extracurricular perspective, we have a set of MBA plus events, as we call them. So it's an umbrella term where we actually basically put lots of different networking events or workshops or different interventions, if you will, that allow us to build the skills for our MBAs. We tend to prevail quite a bit, for example, group dynamics, resilience, group conflict management, and all that sort of thing as well, because it's very, very ingrained, is really at the center of what we actually do with our students in the program.
With all of that accompaniment, because on the one hand, you're offering them so much flexibility, so many great choices. I was going to ask you, how do you then accompany them on this personal leadership journey, awareness, group challenges, and how they can best manage those conflicts? How do you sort of assist them on that journey of self-awareness?
Yeah. So I think one of the I would say one of the key differentiators, perhaps, of our program compared to others, and one certainly that allows us to have this very active learning approach and rely so much on real consultancies, is the fact that we tend to keep our intakes relatively small. It would be impossible for us to be having 3 consultancies plus an ability to give internships to a very high percentage of the class, plus being able to have those very localized interventions to try to build skills if we had a large number of students. We don't tend to take any more than 115 students every single year. Right. And obviously that is what is allowing us to bring enough interesting projects to be able to ensure that our students can actually learn by doing, and certainly that we can get to know our students actually quite closely, and for those students really to bond as a cohort. So I think it's actually quite important for us to keep our class size very small, to be able to accommodate all these interventions and that very active learning approach that we take. Now, one downside of it is that, of course, in keeping our cohort relatively small, to, as I said, around 115 students, we risk the potential of having enough electives, for instance, to be able to offer to our students. So the way we actually square the circle is really by leveraging our very large part-time global MBA that we have all over the world. So whilst we actually have a very small or relatively small class of full-time MBAs, we have very, very large cohorts of part-time MBAs that we are teaching, as I said, at our international centers in Shanghai, Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Dubai, here in Manchester, and so on. So all the electives that our full-time students take them together with our global MBA students. Obviously, that big scale allows us to offer a large amount of electives, gives us a lot of choice. So we have at any one time 25, 26 electives. And obviously, not only that, but it also allows us to give our students in the full-time MBA program an incredibly international experience, because we can leverage all those international centers we have. Our students really can go and take those electives basically wherever they want around the world. So I think in some ways we have the best of both worlds, really. So we're able to really allow our students to customize and personalize their full-time MBA by virtue of keeping it to a relatively small cohort. But at the same time, the global MBA allows us to offer that scale and that scope to provide more breadth in terms of electives, to provide more networking opportunities for our students, to give them an amazing international experience and so on.
Right. I'm sure if I sat down with 115 Manchester MBAs, I'd probably get 115 different responses. But, you know, what do you think that they would say had really sort of stood out or marked the experience and the confidence it's given them for the next steps in their career?
Yeah, I think one of the things that they would say, you've already mentioned, confidence. I think the MBA provides them confidence, and not only confidence in a traditional sense, as in being very self-assured in their own abilities, but perhaps more so confidence as in their ability to rely on others, or perhaps to trust or rely on the potential or the likely outcome of something happening. By that I mean, for example, being confident about the opportunities that uncertainty can bring, or being quite optimistic, taking a positive outlook on life and on the opportunities that they can get once they complete their MBA. And that might translate on them being able to change industry altogether, to change country, to look for more synthetic or more strategic roles, and so on. So confidence is certainly one that tends to be mentioned to us quite often by our graduates. Another one, obviously, is the fact that ours is an incredibly practical program. Right? And again, going back to that point, may that be because of the real client-based consultancies that we offer from the outset, but also through other types of interventions, from our engagement with students from a careers perspective, to all those extracurricular activities that we do under the umbrella term of MBA Plus, or students' engagement with clubs, or indeed looking at how they participate in international competitions, and so on. And I think then finally, our students, or certainly our graduates, would say that their MBA was a transformational experience. So by the time they finish, they will tend to look at the world in a totally different way. It really changes their mindset, and obviously it gives them exposure to different ways of looking at things.
Yeah. So as one of Europe's longest established business schools, pioneer with the consulting projects, what next? You've already, built this global footprint across Asia, the Middle East, Latin America. What do you think the next 3 to 5 years look like in terms of how the MBA programs will evolve?
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of uncertainty, and my guess is possibly as good as anyone else's guess. But what I would see is an increase on the demands on us as MBA program directors for more flexibility. And here I really mean flexibility in many different ways. Flexibility in terms of how we deliver our program. So, of course, without saying that the pandemic has got us very used now to working from home and to using Zoom or Teams or different video conferencing systems a lot more often than we would have in the past. I think students will actually be expecting more virtual delivery. I think there will be a lot more flexibility in terms of how programs are actually structured, even full-time programs. There might be, I think over time, perhaps, more of an expectation that programs should be flexible enough for students perhaps to dip in and out, and going perhaps on a full-time basis for a period of time, then going on a part-time basis, go back on a full-time basis, and so on. Now, how do we actually make that flexibility happen? That can be quite difficult and that can be quite challenging, but I think that's that's perhaps something that students will increasingly expect. Also, perhaps with regards how we combine MBA offerings with perhaps different types of awards. So will we see an increase in the prevalence of MBAs coupled with some form of an MSc, or perhaps different forms of partnerships between different schools for dual awards and so on? That's actually been quite common in the part-time MBA world. But I think it's only a matter of time that full-time MBA program will start looking at all these different permutations sooner rather than later. Right. I think then from the contents perspective, we're already seeing an evolution towards an increased embedding of sustainability, corporate social responsibility, ESG issues in our curricula. I think that will continue. Likewise, we're already witnessing a lot of interest in the effect that technology and digitalization has on business and management in general. It's ubiquitous. So we see it in education, but we see it in healthcare, we see it in finance, we see it in pharma, we see it in telecoms, we see it even on manufacturing. We see it pretty much everywhere. I think that trend, so that expectation of seeing more digitalization, more technology embedded in our curriculum will continue. But I think some of the issues that we're not as of yet witnessing so often in the MBA, and that we will over the next 5 years start seeing more and we might be seeing more issues in terms of work-life balance, mental well-being, issues in terms of resilience, and so on. Those are incredibly important, and I think that those are already starting to be witnessed in practice. So it's only a matter of time that they will be embedded in some way or another in MBA curricula. And another one is, again, historically we would have thought of an MBA having the duties to teach us specific material or content, again, on marketing, on operations, or on finance. Then we saw more schools trying to equip students with skills, collaboration, communications, creativity, critical thinking. We spoke about confidence, and so on. I think slowly but surely we will be seeing more values being embedded into the MBA programs as well. So how can we actually teach empathy? How can we actually get our students to value diversity? How do we get them to have perhaps more of a global outlook? How can we actually make them value integrity, sustainability? This idea that I mentioned a bit earlier as well, of them embracing uncertainty as a good thing, as opposed to something to fear. I think those are the type of issues we're going to be looking at in the MBA curriculum over time. So yes, CSR, technology, we're already seeing a lot of that in our curricula. I think that well-being and values will increasingly being witnessed in our programs.
Well, as we continue to follow management trends on the football pitch or management trends within business, we'll obviously be watching Manchester as you continue to grow and develop with all of those fascinating challenges. Xavier, thank you for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to be able to share some of those perspectives. Our viewers, to give them that deeper dive and a real sense of a distinct identity and a way of building that sort of experiential learning. Great to have you with us at Centre Court.
Thank you, Matt.